In this session, we are going to talk about how to create correlation in SPSS. In correlation, we are going to consider the relationship between two variables. As you see here, we have temperature and water consumption. What we are going to do by creating correlation is we are going to check the relationship between temperature and water consumption. In this, we take Pearson R as for the correlation, and Pearson R usually lies between -1 and +1. Whenever the correlation is closer to -1 or if it is closer to +1, that means the relationship between two variables is stronger. But if you have 0 for the correlation, that means there is no relationship between the variables you have selected. In this case, we have selected temperature and water consumption to check the relationship between them. And if we get a value, that means if we find correlation closer to -1 or +1, that means there is a strong relationship between temperature and water consumption. And if we see 0 as the correlation, that means there is no relationship between temperature and the water consumption. Look at this example. In this example, we have correlation closer to +1. That means whenever one variable value increases, the other variable value also increases. For an example, look at the first point here. X, it has a smaller value and y also has a smaller value. And when we go along the x-axis and y-axis, you can see x values are increasing and y values are also increasing. In such a diagram, we usually have a correlation coefficient closer to +1 because we have variables increases with the other. And look at the second example. According to this scatter plot, what has happened is one variable decreases as the other increases. For an example, whenever you see a larger value for x, the value for y is smaller. Look at the first point. In this point, value of x is smaller and the value of y is larger. And when we look at this point here, x value is larger. On the other hand, y value is smaller. So whenever we have a scatter plot like this usually represents a correlation coefficient closer to -1. That means one variable decreases as the other increases. Now look at the third example. In this one, this indicates 0 correlation coefficient. That means there is no relationship between x and y. When you look at this scatter plot, you can clearly identify that we cannot see any relationship between y and x, and this belongs to a correlation coefficient which is equal to 0. Now let's see how to create the correlation between temperature and water consumption. Select Analyze, and in this case we are going to select Correlate and Bivariate because we have pairs. And now, as usual, you have all the variables you have in the dataset in this left hand side. Here in this dataset, I have only 2 variables, temperature and water consumption. Therefore, I'm going to take both those variables into the right hand side. And remember, when you're going to check correlations, we usually use pairs. Here the pair is water consumption and the temperature. And here we can select the correlation coefficient, and in this case what we are going to use is we are going to use Pearson R. And remember, here test of significance is something that is important to see the relationship between two variables, and in this case we are going to use two-tailed, and this will flag for the significant correlation. That's why we have got a tick here. And click OK. Once you click OK, all the correlations are shown here. And now you see the correlations between water consumption and temperature. Here we have two rows, one for water consumption and the other for temperature values, and two columns, one for water consumption and for temperature. And first row we have Pearson correlation, and in this second row, first item is again Pearson correlation. And when you look at these two values, it represents 1 here, and here also it represents 1. That means a variable gave correlation 1. As I have already mentioned, when we have a correlation coefficient which is closer to -1 or +1, that represents a strong relationship. When you look at the value you have here, that means 0.946, it is closer to 1. That means again you have a strong relationship. And here in this intersection point, this is the intersection point of temperature and water, and this one is also the intersection point of water consumption and the temperature. And both the cases we have value 0.946, which is closer to +1. That means we have a strong relationship between water and temperature. And the second value you have here is the significance level. We know when significance levels are below 0.05, that means it is significant. And in this case, it is also significance. And N means the sample size. And in this case, we have 11 data values. Therefore, this N represents 11. In this representation, you can see small stars here. That means this is significant. Here it also mentions that correlation is significant at the 0.01 level. Now let's see how to read the scatter plot of this. To do that, you will have to select Graphs menu, go to Graph and Chart Builder. Now you see the chart builder. Here from this section, select Scatter Dot. And here we are going to use a simple scatter. You can click on that and drag and drop it here. And you can mention which is going to be your x-axis and which is going to be your y-axis. This is going to be your x-axis and this is going to be your y-axis. Click OK. And now you see the scatter plot of the correlation between temperature and water, and you can see there's a strong relationship between temperature and water consumption. When temperature is higher, the water consumption is also higher, and the temperature is lower, the water consumption level is also lower.